The morning Chicago air was sharp enough to bite. Wind rushed between the glass towers of the Loop, scattering sheets of newspaper across the sidewalk like lost thoughts. Madelyn Robinson ran through it, her heels tapping unevenly, her breath misting in the cold. Her bus had broken down 2 blocks from the station, and the L train had stalled somewhere between Roosevelt and Adams. By the time she reached the revolving doors of the Scott and Raymond Tower, her hair was a storm, and her pulse was an earthquake. Inside the lobby gleamed steel glass and silence. Everyone moved with practiced grace, not a single misplaced step. Madelyn adjusted the strap of her bag and whispered under her breath, "K. Robinson, smile. Pretend you belong." The receptionist at the marble desk barely looked up. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" Madelyn caught her breath. Interview. Executive assistant position. Madelyn Robinson. The woman scanned the tablet eyebrows, lifting just slightly. "You were scheduled for 9:30. Madelyn checked her watch. 9:52. "I'm early for the next one." A beat of silence. The receptionist didn't laugh. "Mr. Scott's interviews are strictly timed. I figured," Madelyn said, brushing an invisible wrinkle from her coat. "Guess I'll just have to make the timing worth it." Before the receptionist could respond, the elevator chimed. A voice called from the mezzanine, calm but clipped. "Send her up." Madelyn turned. Through the glass wall above, she caught a glimpse of him, William Scott. Every inch of him tailored and deliberate. The man was a headline walking the youngest CEO in Chicago, the one who fired 3 assistants in a single day. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Madelyn's stomach tightened. She didn't have the pedigree the others did, no Ivy League degree, no glowing recommendations. Just quick thinking, raw instinct, and the kind of resilience you earned by starting from nothing. The 42nd floor opened into a corridor so quiet she could hear her heartbeat. A soft voice guided her forward. "Mr. Scott is expecting you." The office was sunlight and symmetry. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline, Lake Michigan glittering beyond. William Scott stood behind his desk, head bent over a folder, one hand in the pocket of his charcoal suit. He didn't look up right away. "Ms. Robinson," he said finally. His voice was low, measured like a cello, played softly. "Yes, sir." She stepped forward, careful not to trip on the polished floor. "You're late." "I am," she admitted. "Public transit and I are in a complicated relationship." At last he lifted his gaze. Gray eyes cool, intelligent and unreadable. "You think that's amusing. I think it's honest," she said, keeping her chin up. A shadow of something disapproval, curiosity crossed his face. "Your resume," he said, flipping the pages. "You studied economics at Howard University. You didn't finish. My mother was sick." She replied simply, "I took a job to help with the bills." He nodded once, impassive. "And since then, you've worked in retail hospitality and briefly as a legal clerk, none of which qualifies you to assist a CEO." "True," she said. "But I'm good under pressure. I learn fast and I don't quit when things get hard." His gaze flicked to her. "That's what everyone says before they quit." Madelyn smiled faintly. "Then maybe I'll surprise you." William leaned back in his chair, the faintest hint of challenge in his tone. "You believe confidence makes up for lack of experience?" "No," she said, her voice calm now. "But it helps me walk into rooms like this one." For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the city below filled the silence. Finally, William closed the folder. "This position requires precision, discretion. You'd be managing a schedule that changes every hour. You'll deal with clients who expect perfection." "I don't promise perfection," Madelyn said. "I promise persistence." Something subtle shifted in his expression. He studied her the way one might study a painting that didn't fit expectations. "You don't intimidate easily. You don't scare easily," she countered. "That makes us even." The corner of his mouth almost moved. "Most people are nervous sitting across from me." "I was," she said, "until I realized nerves don't pay rent." He glanced at the clock on the wall. 1-month trial. "If you last, the job is yours." She nodded. "And if I don't?" He stood straightening his tie. "Then you'll be the 12th assistant to leave my office before payday." Madelyn rose too, meeting his height with defiance. "Then I guess I'll have to break your record." He extended his hand. She shook it firm, steady, deliberate. His hand was warm, but his eyes were winter. "Be here tomorrow at 8 sharp. 7:59, she said, "just to keep you guessing." That earned a flicker of surprise, maybe even the ghost of a smile. "Dismissed, Ms. Robinson." She turned toward the door, heart-pounding pulse roaring in her ears. Just before she left, she glanced back. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think you need someone who'll challenge you, not worship you." He said nothing. But when she was gone, his reflection in the window looked a little less composed. The city had begun to blur beneath clouds when Madelyn stepped out of the building. Snow flurries drifted across the river, catching in her hair. She pulled her coat tighter and exhaled a shaky laugh. The interview had been a disaster, or maybe a miracle. It was hard to tell the difference when both left your hands trembling. In his office above William sat alone, the faint scent of her vanilla perfume still lingering in the air. He opened her resume again, though he'd already memorized it. There was nothing remarkable about her on paper. Yet there was something about her voice, the way she refused to bend, the way her words landed like quiet truths. He leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the skyline. "Persistent," he murmured, as if testing the word. Then he smiled, brief, involuntary, gone as quickly as it came. That night, Chicago glowed under the snowfall. Madelyn sat in her small apartment in Bronzeville, typing a resume update she couldn't send yet. Her cat Cleo curled against her leg, purring. The heater rattled. She replayed the meeting over and over in her head. His voice, his stillness, the way those gray eyes didn't soften even once. She hated how much she wanted to see them again. Across the city, William poured himself a glass of bourbon, his reflection stretched against the glass wall of his penthouse. For years he'd built a life that left no room for unpredictability. But now, somewhere between the echo of her laugh and the mess of her presence, a crack had formed in the order he worshipped. He didn't know it yet, but the woman who spilled coffee and showed up late was about to dismantle everything he thought he understood about control. And as snow kept falling over Chicago, two very different people prepared for morning one with a fresh-pressed suit and perfect plans, the other with faith that chaos could sometimes lead to something extraordinary. The next morning, Chicago was still half asleep. Gray light spilled over the frozen river as commuters rushed through the wind, clutching their coffees like lifelines. Inside the Scott and Raymond Tower, everything gleamed, polished steel, quiet efficiency. No room for mistakes. At exactly 7:59, the elevator chimed open on the 42nd floor, and Madelyn Robinson stepped out, clutching her notebook and a paper cup of cheap convenience store coffee. Her curls framed her face in soft disarray, and her blazer, pressed 3 times to hide the thrift store wrinkles, hung just right today. She paused outside the glass office door, took a breath, and whispered, "You've got this." Then she walked in. Every head turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. The new assistant had arrived. "Morning," she said, smiling at the room like she hadn't just walked into a silent storm. Harper, the senior operations manager, gave her a once-over that could have frozen lava. "You're the new one." "Guilty," Madelyn said lightly. She won't last 2 weeks, someone murmured near the copy machine. Madelyn pretended not to hear. She'd been underestimated before it was practically a sport. The glass wall to William Scott's office stood closed, but through it she could see him already working, head bent, sleeves rolled to his forearms, phone pressed to his ear. Even from here, his presence carried. He wasn't loud or demanding. He didn't need to be. The way people held their breath when he moved said everything. At 8:00 sharp, his door opened. Ms. Robinson. His voice was even smooth as glass, but with that edge of warning. Madelyn straightened. Good morning, Mr. Scott. Follow me. He led her into his office without looking back. Sunlight poured across the desk, reflecting off the chrome fixtures. The city stretched below them, alive and cold. William gestured toward a sleek tablet on the table. Your login credentials. Calendar, internal mail scheduling software. You're responsible for all incoming meetings, calls, and travel coordination. I expect no errors. Madelyn's fingers brushed the device. Understood. He looked at her. Do you know why the last assistant left? She hesitated. I heard she found other opportunities. He smiled, faintly humorless. She found my expectations unreasonable. Madelyn lifted her chin. I'm not easily scared, Mr. Scott. Good, he said, sitting. You'll need that. The first hour was chaos, wrapped in silence. She answered calls, sorted meeting requests, and accidentally opened an email marked confidential, legal department only. When William's shadow fell across her desk, she froze. You opened that? His voice wasn't raised, but it cut through her nerves. I did. Accidentally. I didn't read it. You should have stopped it accidentally, he said dryly. She took a slow breath, forcing calm. Noted. He studied her a moment longer, then turned away. Bring me the updated investor report in 15 minutes. Madelyn exhaled when he was gone. 15 minutes. She scanned the shared drive, fingers flying over the keyboard. Her heart raced, but she found it buried in the finance folder. She printed, organized, and delivered it to his desk with 1 minute to spare. William looked up from his screen, eyebrows slightly raised. Impressive. I told you, she said. Persistence. For a moment his mouth softened, not a smile exactly, but something close. At noon the office shifted. The staff filed out for lunch, laughter echoing faintly down the hall. Madelyn stayed at her desk, unpacking a turkey sandwich and typing notes from his morning meetings. Her phone buzzed, an internal message. William Scott, conference room 1215. Bring the quarterly projections. She wiped her hands, gathered the files, and walked into the glass-walled room. William stood by the window jacket, off, sleeves rolled. The city glimmered behind him, and for the first time he looked human. Tired, maybe. Alone. He didn't turn. You didn't take a break. I'm still learning the ropes. You'll burn out if you keep that pace. Madelyn smiled faintly. You sound like someone who already did. He turned then, eyes sharp, but unreadable. Sit. She sat across from him. He gestured to the papers. Explain the key points. She hesitated, surprised. You want me to? Yes, he said simply. So she did, her voice steady, confident. She'd studied the numbers on her own time, curious about the company's growth strategy. When she finished, the silence between them felt different, warmer somehow. You read beyond what I assigned, he said. I like knowing the full picture, she replied. It helps me understand why I'm running from meeting to meeting. Most assistants don't ask why, he said. Then maybe that's why they don't last. Something in his gaze softened almost imperceptibly. You're not what I expected. She tilted her head. Good or bad? He didn't answer. Instead, he looked out the window again. We'll see. By evening, the floor had emptied. The city outside was a blur of headlights and drifting snow. Madelyn gathered her things, stretching her aching shoulders. As she turned off her monitor, a voice stopped her. Ms. Robinson. William stood at his door coat over his arm. You're still here. So are you, she said. He studied her for a beat. You didn't make any major errors today. I'll take that as a compliment. It was one he said, almost smiling. Be here at 7:45 tomorrow. We have an early board call. She blinked. You said 8. I did. I changed my mind. Madelyn nodded slowly. Noted. I'll bring coffee. He raised an eyebrow. You'll need to know how I take it. I already asked the receptionist, she said. Double espresso. No sugar, no milk. Like your personality. His lips curved, not quite a smile, but close enough to make her heartbeat stumble. Good night, Ms. Robinson. When the elevator doors closed behind him, the silence returned, but it wasn't the same. The air felt charged, as if the day had shifted something invisible. Outside, the city glittered beneath snowlight. Madelyn walked toward the subway coat collar, pulled tight, her mind replaying every glance, every line of his voice. She didn't want to admit it, but something about William Scott fascinated her. Not his wealth, not his reputation, something quieter. The way he carried silence like armor. The loneliness behind it. In his car, William drove through the narrow streets along the river. He didn't turn on the radio. He didn't like noise. Yet tonight the silence felt heavier. He saw her reflection in his mind, bright eyes, calm defiance, and for reasons he didn't care to examine, he couldn't shake it. He had told himself she wouldn't last a week. Now he wasn't so sure. When Madelyn reached her apartment, Cleo greeted her with a meow and a flick of the tail. She dropped her bag, sank onto the couch, and stared at the faint city lights beyond the fogged window. She should have felt exhausted, but her mind buzzed with energy, with curiosity. What made a man like him so guarded? What would it take to break through that wall, somewhere across the skyline? William stepped into his penthouse, set his phone on the counter and paused. Her voice echoed faintly in his memory, warm, certain, impossible to ignore. He poured himself a glass of bourbon but didn't drink. Instead, he found himself looking toward the city lights, wondering for the first time in years what it might feel like to be truly seen. And below that glittering skyline, a woman who was never supposed to last began to unknowingly rewrite the rules of his world. The third morning arrived, wrapped in the kind of cold that made the Chicago River look like steel. Inside the Scott and Raymond Tower, heaters hummed softly, and every polished surface reflected ambition. Madelyn Robinson stood at her desk before sunrise, sorting through color-coded folders. She'd memorized William Scott's schedule, double-checked every meeting, and still felt the nervous tremor that came with being one mistake away from disaster. At 7:43, the elevator chimed. He was always early. William stepped out, the navy suit, crisp, dark coat slung over one arm. He paused when he saw her already there. You're earlier than expected. I figured I'd match your chaos, she said lightly. Order, he corrected. I prefer order. Funny, she murmured, handing him his espresso. Most people who need control are hiding from chaos. He raised an eyebrow, but the corner of his mouth almost curved. You analyze your boss before coffee, only the interesting ones. He didn't answer. But as he walked into his office, he glanced back, once a flicker quick and almost human. The day unfolded in precise ticking minutes. Meetings, calls, reports. William was relentless, his words measured, and his expectations surgical. Yet somewhere between the conference calls and board summaries, Madelyn noticed something. He didn't bark orders or raise his voice. He didn't need to. People adjusted themselves to fit his silence. By mid-morning, the phone rang, an investor from New York, demanding changes to a contract. Madelyn transferred the call, but the line glitched, looping static through the office speakers. "Ms. Robinson," William said, glancing up. "Why is Mr. Delacroix's voice echoing through my floor?" "Technical issues," she replied, pressing buttons like a pianist who'd forgotten the song. His tone stayed calm, dangerous. "Resolve them." "I'm trying," she muttered. "You're pressing the same button repeatedly. I'm manifesting results." He exhaled, half a sigh, half disbelief. "Move." He leaned in his hand, brushing hers as he took the phone. The contact startled her. His skin was warm, his sleeve brushing her wrist. For a split second, the world outside disappeared. "There," he said, disconnecting the call. "Fixed." "Thank you," she said softly. He stepped back. "You're trembling." "Adrenaline," she lied. "And caffeine." His gaze lingered on her longer than it should have. Then he turned away. "Next time, ask IT. You're not paid to improvise." "Maybe you should try it sometime," she said, before she could stop herself. His head turned. The faintest flicker of surprise crossed his face. "Excuse me." "Nothing," she said quickly, just thinking out loud. He didn't reply, but the ghost of a smile played at the edge of his mouth as he closed the door behind him. Later that afternoon, Harper from operations stopped by Madelyn's desk carrying a folder and a smirk. "He hasn't fired you yet." "Impressive." Madelyn looked up. Was that meant to sound supportive? "Piece of advice," Harper said, leaning close. "Don't mistake his patience for interest. Mr. Scott doesn't mix business with anything else." Madelyn met her gaze evenly. "Good thing I'm here for the business." When Harper left, Madelyn sat still, the words lingering like static. She didn't want to admit how much they unsettled her. That evening, snow fell again, soft and steady. William stayed late, reviewing contracts. Through the glass, Madelyn could see him working under the dim light sleeves, rolled, his focus absolute. She gathered the courage to knock. "Come in," he said without looking up. "I brought the revised investor notes." She stepped closer, setting the folder on his desk. He nodded, scanning the first page. "Your formatting is cleaner than the last draft." "I figured you'd prefer symmetry," she said. "You seem like someone who measures his pens by distance." He looked up. "You pay attention." "I try." Silence filled the room, not uncomfortable, just thick with something unspoken. He leaned back in his chair. "Tell me something, Ms. Robinson. Why did you really take this job?" Madelyn hesitated. "I told you, I needed work." "That's not an answer," he said quietly. "It's a survival statement." She met his gaze. "Maybe survival is the only thing I've been good at." Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps. He nodded slowly, as if filing that truth away. "You're ambitious." "Not really. I just hate standing still." For a long moment he studied her. Then, softer than she expected, he said, "So do I." The clock ticked. Somewhere below, the cleaning staff began their rounds. The city outside glowed in layers of amber and frost. Madelyn shifted her weight. "Mr. Scott, William," he interrupted, surprising even himself. She blinked. "What?" He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "Call me William when we're not in meetings." Her heart tripped. "That's unusually human of you." "Don't get used to it," he said, a hint of humor under the calm. "I won't," she said softly, though she already knew she might. They spoke for another hour about schedules, deadlines, and trivialities that somehow didn't feel trivial. She learned he'd grown up near Boston, that his father left when he was 12, that silence had been his mother's preferred language. He learned she used to sing in a community choir, that she collected vintage postcards, that she still dreamed of finishing college someday. None of it belonged in an office conversation, but somehow it fit. When she finally stood to leave, he said quietly, "You did well today." Madelyn froze. Compliments from William Scott were rarer than snowfall in July. "Thank you." His eyes softened just slightly. "Get some rest, Ms. Robinson. Good night, William." The sound of his name from her lips hung between them, delicate and dangerous. He didn't stop her when she left, but his gaze followed her reflection in the glass until the elevator doors closed. Later, as he sat alone in the dim office, he found himself staring at the space she'd just occupied. He told himself it was curiosity, nothing more. But deep down, something in him had shifted a tremor in the foundation he'd built so carefully. Madelyn walked home through the falling snow, the city lights reflecting off wet pavement. She couldn't stop replaying his voice, the way it softened when he said her name. It wasn't romance, she told herself. It was something else. Respect, maybe. Recognition. A quiet connection between two people who lived their lives behind walls. When she reached her apartment, she hung her coat, fed Cleo, and sat by the window with her notebook open, the city pulsing below. Her mind kept drifting to his expression, controlled, confident, but haunted by something she couldn't name. Across the city, William poured himself another coffee. Not bourbon this time. His reflection stared back at him from the window, and for once he didn't like the man he saw. He was composed, successful, admired, and utterly alone. He thought of Madelyn's voice, the way she'd said his name without fear. Most people saw him as untouchable, but she spoke to him like he was simply human. He didn't know whether to resent her for it or thank her. In the quiet, a memory surfaced, his father walking out the door, his mother's silence filling every room like smoke. He'd learned to equate control with safety, solitude, with strength. But tonight, in the reflection of a woman who refused to flinch, he saw a life he'd never lived. He turned off the lights, leaving only the city to glow around him. Somewhere beyond that skyline, Madelyn was laughing softly to herself, unaware that the man who didn't believe in connection had already begun to feel its pull. The invitation arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, printed on thick cream paper and sealed with gold foil. Madelyn found it on her desk, resting atop a stack of quarterly reports. Her name was written in William's precise handwriting. Scott and Raymond. Annual. Gala. Attendance required. Required, not requested. She read the line twice, her stomach twisting. Around her, the office buzzed with excitement, everyone whispering about gowns, champagne, and the rooftop ballroom overlooking the Chicago skyline. For most, it was the social event of the year. For her, it sounded like walking barefoot through a minefield. That evening, when most of the staff had gone, she stepped into William's office. He was still working, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled light from the window, catching the edges of his silver cufflinks. "Mr. Scott." She began holding up the invitation. "William," he corrected without looking up. "Fine. William." She hesitated. "You marked this as required. I thought assistants handled logistics, not red carpets." He set down his pen and leaned back. "You've been managing investor communications. You're expected to attend." "Expected by who?" "By me." She crossed her arms. "You're not subtle. You know that." He looked at her evenly. "Subtlety wastes time. I don't have anything to wear." His mouth twitched. "I find that unlikely. Not anything gala-worthy. William opened a drawer, pulled out a small black envelope, and slid it across the desk. Consider this a company expense. She frowned. You're buying me a dress. I'm giving you access to the event's wardrobe sponsor. They owe me a favor. Madelyn stared at him, caught somewhere between irritation and disbelief. You realize how controlling that sounds? He met her gaze calmly. You'll thank me when you're not underdressed. She snatched the envelope. I don't need rescuing. Good, he said softly, almost to himself, because I stopped believing in rescue a long time ago. The gala night arrived under a velvet sky. The city glittered in the reflection of the river lights rippling across the water like liquid fire. Madelyn stood outside the ballroom doors, smoothing the silk of her crimson gown. The dress fit perfectly, too perfectly, and the thought that he'd somehow known her size made her pulse race in ways she didn't want to acknowledge. Inside the room was alive with music and murmured laughter. Chandeliers cast soft light over crystal glasses and designer suits. The air smelled of roses and ambition. She spotted William near the bar, surrounded by board members and investors. His tuxedo fit like it had been sewn directly onto him. When his eyes found her, the conversation around him blurred to static. He didn't speak, just watched, as if her arrival had shifted the room's gravity. Madelyn approached with a practiced smile. You could at least pretend to be surprised I showed up. He offered his arm. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure either. As they moved through the crowd, people turned, some with admiration, others with curiosity. Whispers followed them like perfume. Who's she? Someone asked. The new assistant, another replied. Scott's latest experiment. Madelyn's smile didn't falter, but her grip on his arm tightened. You hear that? I do. And you're not going to say anything. He looked down at her. Do I need to? Yes. William stopped walking. The crowd shifted uneasily around them. Then his voice, low and deliberate, cut through the noise. For anyone curious, this woman is the reason our Q4 projections exceeded expectations. You're welcome to thank her later. The whispers vanished. Madelyn blinked up at him, stunned. You didn't have to do that. I know. Then why? He looked at her like the answer was obvious. Because it was true. They spent the next hour talking with clients, investors, and executives. She handled herself with poise, her laughter bright, her wit quick. More than once, William caught himself watching her instead of the conversation. It wasn't just attraction, it was recognition. She belonged here, even if she didn't believe it yet. At one point, she excused herself to get some air. The balcony stretched above the city wind, tugging softly at her hair. Below, Chicago shimmered in motion, cars tracing ribbons of light, the river glinting silver. She closed her eyes, letting the noise of the party fade. You hate these events. William's voice came from behind her. She turned, startled. You're supposed to be charming donors. They're already charmed, he said, stepping closer. You're the one who disappeared. I needed a minute. It's a lot. He studied her profile, the faint tremor of her breath in the cold air. You handled yourself well tonight. Thanks. She looked up at him. You don't give compliments easily, do you? I give them when they're earned. Her eyes softened. You surprise me sometimes. That's dangerous, he said quietly. Why? Because people stop guarding themselves when they're surprised. She smiled faintly. And that's a bad thing. He didn't answer. The city wind tangled through her curls, carrying her perfume, warm vanilla, faint and familiar. He stepped closer, close enough that the sound of his breath mingled with hers. Madelyn, he said her name, a whisper that seemed to reverberate somewhere deeper. For a moment, the world narrowed to that space between them. But before either could speak, a voice from the doorway broke the spell. "Mr. Scott," one of the investors called. "They need you for the toast." William stepped back, his expression locking back into professionalism. "Of course." He turned to her. "Will you be all right?" She nodded. "Go. Be the legend they expect." He hesitated a beat longer, then left. Madelyn stayed on the balcony, heart pounding. Somewhere inside, laughter rose and glasses clinked, but out here, everything felt still. She didn't know what had just passed between them. Something fragile, something dangerous. But she knew it had changed the air. Later, as the evening wound down, she searched for him among the crowd, but couldn't find him. Instead, she ran into Harper near the exit. "Enjoying yourself?" Harper asked, voice edged with sarcasm. Madelyn forced a smile. "Just doing my job." Harper's gaze flicked toward the ballroom. "Be careful, Robinson. Men like William Scott don't fall, they calculate." Madelyn's reply came quietly. "Maybe some things aren't meant to be calculated." She left before Harper could answer. Outside, the city was hushed under fresh snow. As she waited for her ride, her phone buzzed with a message. "William Scott. You forgot your coat. It's in my car." She looked up, and there he was, standing beside a black sedan coat draped over his arm. He approached, holding it out. "You'll freeze. You really don't do small talk, do you?" she teased softly, as she slipped into the warmth. He studied her for a moment. "I'm not good at pretending." "I noticed." They stood there quiet as snowflakes melted against the edges of her red dress. He finally said, "You were extraordinary tonight." Her throat tightened. "Thank you." Then he opened the car door for her, his hand brushing her back as she stepped inside. The touch was brief, but it left a trail of heat that stayed long after he closed the door. When the car pulled away, she glanced through the window. William stood under the falling snow, his expression unreadable, the city lights haloing him in silver. And for the first time she wondered if the man who built his world on control had just started to lose it. It began with a phone call, one that shattered the fragile balance they'd built. It was a Monday morning, cold and metallic, the kind of Chicago morning where the sky looked like brushed aluminum. Madelyn sat at her desk, sipping her coffee and reviewing William's upcoming meetings, when the line on his private phone lit up. The name flashing across the screen made his expression freeze. Margaret Scott. He stared at it for a long second before answering. "Mother." His tone, smooth, as always, carried something underneath a tension he didn't bother to hide. Madelyn pretended not to listen, but the low murmur of his voice carried through the glass. "Yes," William said. "The gala went well. The investors were satisfied. No mother. I'm not interested in another merger dinner." He paused, his jaw tightened. "No, I'm not seeing anyone." Madelyn's pen stilled. Then suddenly his voice changed, sharper, defensive. "That's not necessary. I don't need you arranging my personal life." Whatever she said next made him go completely still. His eyes flicked up, meeting Madelyn's through the glass. She dropped her gaze instantly, heart stuttering. When he ended the call, he didn't move for a moment. Then slowly, he stepped out of the office. "Ms. Robinson," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Yes, Mr. Scott. Cancel my afternoon meeting with Mr. Patel." She blinked. "Of course. Is everything all right?" He hesitated. "My mother will be in town tomorrow." Madelyn nodded cautiously. "Should I arrange accommodations?" His gaze held hers a little too long. "No, she'll be expecting something different." The next day, just before noon, Madelyn found herself standing in front of a small French restaurant in the Gold Coast, wind biting at her cheeks. She still didn't quite understand how it happened. How would you accompany me to lunch had turned into, you'll be my pretend girlfriend for one meal. The absurdity of it made her laugh under her breath. Inside the restaurant gleamed with crystal and soft jazz. She spotted William immediately impeccable as always, though today there was something almost uneasy in the way he adjusted his cufflinks. When he saw her, his eyes widened slightly. She'd chosen a navy blue dress, simple but elegant hair, gathered in soft curls at her neck. "You're early," he said. "You sound surprised. I didn't think you'd actually come." She smiled faintly. "You asked me to help. I'm helping." He looked down for a second, almost embarrassed. "Thank you." Before she could answer, a poised woman in her 60s swept through the door, her entrance, commanding attention without needing to demand it. Margaret Scott, silver hair, tailored coat diamonds that didn't glitter so much as worn. William. Her voice was smooth, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Then she noticed Madelyn. "And who is this?" William hesitated only a fraction. "Mother, this is Madelyn Robinson, my partner." Madelyn felt her heart stop. Partner. Margaret's gaze was sharp, assessing. "Partner, I wasn't aware. It's recent," William said evenly. Madelyn extended her hand. "It's lovely to meet you, Mrs. Scott." Margaret's handshake was cool. "Likewise. I must say you're not what I expected." "I get that a lot," Madelyn replied gently. A flicker of something surprise maybe crossed the older woman's face. They took their seats and conversation began like a dance, choreographed by tension. Margaret asked polite questions that felt like tests where Madelyn grew up, what her parents did, what schools she attended. "I was raised in South Chicago," Madelyn said. "My mom's a nurse. I studied economics before life got in the way." Margaret smiled without warmth. How quaint. William always admired self-made people. "Didn't you, dear?" William's fork paused midair. "I admire integrity," he said. Madelyn glanced at him, his expression unreadable, his tone soft but solid. When the waiter came, Margaret ordered wine for the table, then turned to her son. "You know, William, I've been speaking with the Langleys. Their daughter Claire just finished her MBA at Wharton." "Brilliant girl, refined mother," he said quietly. "Stop." Her brows lifted. "Stop what?" "Trying to design my life." Margaret's gaze flicked between him and Madelyn, realization dawning. "So this arrangement is your rebellion," Madelyn spoke before he could answer. "With respect, Mrs. Scott, I don't think William needs to rebel to make a choice." The table went silent. William's eyes met hers, and for a heartbeat, something like pride flickered there. Margaret's lips tightened, but she didn't argue. The rest of lunch unfolded in a strained calm. Madelyn spoke when needed, polite but steady, refusing to shrink under the weight of pedigree. And when they parted outside in the cold, Margaret gave her a long, unreadable look. "You have spirit," she said finally. "That's unusual." Madelyn smiled. "I take that as a compliment." "Don't," Margaret murmured, before stepping into her car and disappearing into traffic. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city hummed around them, snow beginning to fall in fine silver threads. "Well," Madelyn said softly, "that was something." William's breath fogged in the cold. "You were remarkable. Remarkably terrified, maybe." He looked at her, the faintest warmth in his eyes. "No, you handled her better than anyone ever has." Madelyn laughed quietly. "I wasn't trying to handle her. I just told the truth. That's what makes it impressive." They started walking toward the car. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It pulsed alive with something neither wanted to name. Inside the car, the heater hummed softly. Madelyn glanced at him. You really didn't have to drag me into that, you know. I didn't plan to, he admitted. But when she asked if I was alone, the word no came out before I thought. She smiled. You're full of surprises, Mr. Scott. William. He corrected automatically. Her voice softened. William. The sound of his name in her mouth did something strange to him, pulled at the edges of his composure. When they stopped in front of her apartment, the world outside had turned to glass and snow. He looked at her for a long moment, the city lights flickering over his face. Thank you, he said finally, for today. She tilted her head. You mean for saving you from your mother? For reminding me who I am when she tries to make me forget? Her smile faded gentler now. She's still your mother, William. I know, he said quietly. That's the hardest part. A horn blared behind them, breaking the stillness. Madelyn reached for the door handle. Good night. He caught her wrist, not roughly, but enough to make her still. Madelyn. She looked at him, breath-catching. For a second, it seemed he might say something else, something dangerous. But instead, he released her hand. Drive safe, he said. She stepped out, closing the door gently. From the sidewalk, she watched his car disappear into the night headlights, cutting through the falling snow. Her heart felt unsteady, too full of questions she couldn't yet ask. In the solitude of that quiet street, she finally let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Whatever line they'd been walking had blurred tonight, and neither of them could pretend not to see it anymore. The first snow of December had settled over Chicago like powdered glass, softening the edges of the skyline and turning the city into something quieter, more fragile. Inside the Scott and Raymond Tower, the world was anything but still. Deadlines loomed. The Sterling campaign was days from launch, and William Scott's office burned with the kind of tension that came from chasing perfection too long without rest. Madelyn sat at her desk outside his glass-walled office, surrounded by color-coded folders and 3 half-empty coffee cups. It was past 10 at night. The building had emptied hours ago, but William was still inside. Light's low sleeves rolled, eyes locked on the glowing screen in front of him. She knocked lightly. You've been in there since 8. You need a break. I don't take breaks, he replied without looking up. She stepped inside anyway, the sound of her heels soft against the carpet. That's not healthy. He glanced up, eyes shadowed but alert. Neither is missing a deadline. You already finished the proposal 2 hours ago. You're just rewriting it for the 4th time. I'm improving it. You're obsessing. That made him pause. His gaze lifted to hers, the faintest flicker of exhaustion breaking through the calm. Why are you still here, Madelyn? Because someone has to make sure you don't pass out at your desk, she said, walking over to the coffee table. You didn't even eat dinner, did you? He didn't answer. She sighed, setting a takeout bag on his desk. Here, Thai food. And before you tell me you're not hungry, it's already paid for. He eyed the bag suspiciously. When did you find time to order that? About the time you decided commas were more important than oxygen. Despite himself, he almost smiled. He took the container, unfolding the lid as steam drifted into the air. You're very stubborn, you know that I've been told. She sat across from him. You like pad thai? I don't know, he said honestly. I can't remember the last time I ate it. Then tonight's a good time to start. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the faint hum of the city through the windows. Outside, snow fell in soft spirals, catching the light from Michigan Avenue below. Madelyn studied him quietly, the loosened tie, the faint stubble, the way he kept glancing back at the laptop as if it might vanish. You ever get tired of being perfect? She asked finally. He looked at her sharply. Perfect. That's what everyone thinks you are, she said. Flawless, unshakable, untouchable. The guy who never gets tired, never makes mistakes. I make plenty. Then why hide them? His fork froze midair. Because people don't forgive men in my position for being human. Maybe you just never gave them the chance. He leaned back, his gaze steady on hers. You think it's that simple? I think nothing's simple, she said softly. But maybe it could be easier if you let it. For a moment, the air between them shifted, less professional, more personal. There was something raw in his eyes, something that cracked through the armor he wore so tightly. He looked away first. You talk like someone who's seen the worst in people and still believes in them. I've seen the worst, she said quietly, and I still do. He was silent. Then, almost to himself, he said, I envy that. The clock ticked past 11. Her phone buzzed with a text from her roommate, you alive, but she ignored it. William had returned to his computer, though now he wasn't typing, just staring at the screen as if the words had finally turned against him. William, she said, standing. Go home. I'm fine. You're not. You look pale. I don't have time to. He stopped mid-sentence, swaying slightly in his chair. Madelyn crossed the room in an instant. Hey, hey. She caught his arm as he pressed a hand to his temple. I just dizzy, he muttered. You haven't eaten all day. You've been running on caffeine for 48 hours, and you think that's normal? I just need a minute. But his knees buckled before he could stand. She guided him down to the couch near the window, her heart hammering. You're burning up, she whispered, touching his forehead. His skin was hot, flushed. You've got a fever. I'm fine, he said again, though his voice had lost its conviction. Stop saying that. She rummaged through the cabinet, found a small first aid kit and some aspirin, then poured him water. Here, take this. He looked at her, really looked at her as she knelt beside the couch. Something unguarded passed between them, something that didn't belong in a boardroom. You shouldn't have to take care of me, he said softly. Someone has to, she replied. His lips curved faintly. You're infuriating. And you're impossible, she countered. Now lie down before I call an ambulance. He obeyed, half smiling, half delirious. As she draped a blanket over him, he caught her wrist. Madelyn. Yeah? Don't leave yet. Her breath caught. I wasn't planning to. He closed his eyes, his grip loosening, but still there, his voice slipping into the kind of vulnerability that only came when the world stopped watching. I don't let people get close, he murmured. It's easier that way. I know, she whispered, but you keep showing up. I know that too. He opened his eyes again, fever glazed, but clear. Why? She hesitated. Maybe because I see something in you that you don't let anyone else see. What's that? The part of you that's still learning how to breathe. He didn't answer, just stared at her like he was trying to memorize her face. And then quietly he said, You make it hard to stay numb. Madelyn swallowed, fighting the ache in her chest, then stopped trying. He looked away, eyes heavy. If I do, I might not be able to stop. You'll figure it out, she said gently. You always do. She stayed until his breathing steadied. The city outside blurred into silver and gold through the window, the sound of snow against glass, like a heartbeat. When she finally leaned back, exhaustion crept into her bones. She should have left, but she couldn't. Not when he looked like that, so untouchable by day, so breakable now. Sometime after midnight, he stirred. Madelyn. She looked up from where she'd been sitting beside the couch. Yeah. He smiled, faintly, eyes still closed. You're humming. I didn't realize I was. You sound safe. Her throat tightened. Go back to sleep. He did. By morning, the fever had broken. William woke to sunlight streaking across the office and the faint smell of chamomile tea. Madelyn was asleep in the chair beside him, coat draped over her shoulders, head tilted to one side. He watched her for a long moment, her calm breathing, the soft curl of her hair, the way her hand still rested on the edge of the couch near his. Something in his chest shifted again, something that felt dangerously close to peace. Quietly, he reached for the blanket she'd tucked around him and placed it over her instead. When she stirred, her eyes blinked open hazy. You're awake, she murmured. I am. How do you feel? Better, he said. Then, after a pause, because of you. She smiled, sleepy and unguarded. You don't have to say that. I know, he said, voice low. But I want to. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was alive, electric, the kind that said something had changed, even if neither was ready to name it. When she finally gathered her things to leave, he stood watching from the doorway, the early light painting her silhouette in gold. And though neither of them said it aloud, they both knew that after that night, nothing between them would ever go back to the way it was. The morning after William's fever passed, Chicago was wrapped in a thin mist that blurred the skyline into watercolor gray. From the 42nd floor, the city seemed distant, unreachable. Inside the Scott and Raymond Tower, the world moved at its usual rhythm. Phones ringing, heels clicking, ambition, humming. But something between William and Madelyn had quietly shifted. He was back to his usual form, pressed suit, calm tone, sharp efficiency. But his eyes, those steady gray eyes, lingered on her a little longer now, as if memorizing something he couldn't quite name. Madelyn, for her part, acted as though nothing had changed. She arrived early, handled calls, arranged meetings, and smiled when necessary. Yet every time she walked into his office, she could feel it, the undercurrent, the unspoken thing that filled the air like static before a storm. At 11 Hozuro, Harper stopped by her desk, tapping a manicured nail against the surface. You've been quiet lately? Just busy, Madelyn said, glancing at her screen. Busy with work or with the boss? Harper's smirk was deliberate. Madelyn looked up. What's that supposed to mean? Come on, Robinson. We've all noticed it. The late nights, the way he looks at you like you're the first person who's ever disagreed with him and lived to tell the story. That's ridiculous, Madelyn said evenly. Maybe. But be careful, Harper murmured. William Scott doesn't do attachments. He rebuilds, replaces, and moves on. Madelyn met her gaze calmly. Then I guess it's a good thing I'm not looking to be attached. But as Harper walked away, the words rang hollow, because part of her knew it wasn't that simple anymore. By evening, the office had emptied the city outside, fading into snow and neon. William was still at his desk reviewing the final projections for the Sterling campaign launch. Madelyn stood by the window, her reflection framed against the city lights. You can go home, you know, he said without looking up. So can you. He smiled faintly. Touché. She turned to face him. Are you always like this? All work. No pause. Pausing is dangerous. So is burning out. He looked up then, the corner of his mouth twitching. You're still lecturing me. Someone has to. He leaned back in his chair, eyes tracing her quietly. You didn't answer me the other night. She hesitated. About what? Why you keep showing up. Madelyn smiled softly. Maybe I'm just stubborn. No, he said. You're brave. There's a difference. Her pulse quickened. And you? He looked down at his hands. I'm a man who forgot how to be brave. For a moment, silence filled the room, gentle, unguarded. Then, unexpectedly, his phone buzzed. The name flashing on the screen, Claire Langley. Madelyn remembered that name, Margaret Scott's favorite potential daughter-in-law. "Are you going to answer?" she asked quietly. William hesitated, then declined the call. "No." "She's persistent," Madelyn said, trying to sound casual. "She's strategic," he corrected. "There's a difference." But something in her chest tightened anyway. He noticed. "You disapprove." "I don't have the right to," she said, forcing a smile. He studied her face. "Madelyn." Before he could continue, there was a knock on the door. A junior associate poked his head in. "Mr. Scott, the Sterling presentation has an issue. The client wants changes before tomorrow's launch." William's jaw tensed. "At this hour, yes, sir." He stood, already gathering his jacket. "We'll handle it." Then, glancing at Madelyn, he added, "You're coming with me." They arrived at the Sterling Tower downtown, close to midnight. The lobby was empty, the air smelling faintly of polished marble and stress. Inside the conference room, a small team of executives waited, frustration etched on their faces. The meeting lasted hours. Arguments, revisions, design changes. William was precise but firm, cutting through excuses with that calm authority only he possessed. Madelyn sat beside him, taking notes, watching how he commanded the room, not with volume, but with quiet certainty. At 2:15 a.m., when the final draft was approved, the tension broke like a held breath. The team dispersed, exhausted but relieved. William loosened his tie and leaned back in his chair. "You should have gone home and missed the fun," she said, smiling faintly. He chuckled, rare and soft. "You're infuriating." Again constantly. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the city stretching wide and sleepless beyond the windows. Then Madelyn said, "You were good in there. So were you." "I didn't do anything." "You stayed," he said simply. "That's more than most people do." The quiet stretched again, but this time it felt heavier. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, it was full waiting. Madelyn stood gathering her things. "We should go." William rose too, but as she reached for her coat, he stopped her. "Madelyn." She turned. "What is it?" His voice was low, rougher than usual. "I keep trying not to think about you." Her heart stilled. "But I do," he continued. "Every time I close my eyes, every time I walk into this office, I think about you." "William, I know this isn't fair," he said, stepping closer. "You work for me. There are lines I'm not supposed to cross. But when you look at me the way you do, I don't look at you any particular way," she said, though. Her voice trembled. He smiled, slow and knowing. "Yes, you do." The space between them shrank until she could feel the warmth of his breath. "This isn't smart," she whispered. "I've built my life on smart," he said, "and it's never made me feel like this." He reached out his fingers, brushing her cheek, tentative, reverent. She didn't pull away. For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. The snow, the skyline, the ticking clock. There was only him. Then, just as his thumb traced the edge of her jaw, she took a step back. "We can't." He froze. "This job, it means something to me," she said softly. "And you, whatever this is, it could ruin both of us." He exhaled long and heavy. "You think I don't know that? Then don't make me forget it." She turned toward the door, her pulse a storm. "Madelyn," he said, behind her voice low, "you make me want to be a better man." She stopped her hand on the handle. "Then start by letting me walk away tonight." He didn't stop her. When she stepped outside, the cold hit her like clarity. The snow had thickened, blanketing the streets in white. Her heart felt heavy, caught between wanting and reason. Across the glass, she saw him still standing there, framed by city light, his reflection fractured against the window. He looked like a man who had everything, and suddenly realized how little it meant. Back in her apartment, long past 3 in the morning, Madelyn sat by the window, the city silent below. She pressed her forehead against the glass, whispering to no one. Why does it hurt to want something you can't have? And somewhere across town, William stood in his darkened penthouse, the snow blurring the skyline outside. His phone buzzed with a message from Claire Langley again. He didn't answer. He deleted it. Then quietly he closed his eyes and saw her face. He had spent years mastering control, but control, he realized, knew had nothing to do with strength. Not when it came to her. The snow outside had turned to rain, the kind that fell in slow, deliberate sheets against the glass, blurring the skyline into silver. A week had passed since that night at Sterling Tower, and the air between William and Madelyn had thickened with unspoken words. They still worked side by side, still exchanged the same sharp wit and cool professionalism. But something beneath the surface kept shifting like a melody neither could stop hearing. Madelyn arrived early as usual, her coffee cooling beside her keyboard. The office was still quiet, the hum of the city below distant and low. She reviewed the client proposals, pretending not to think about him, about that moment when his hand had brushed her face and the world had narrowed to a breath. The elevator chimed softly. William stepped out, phone pressed to his ear, his tone clipped. No, that's not acceptable. Tell them we're not extending the deadline. He paused, listening. Then, find someone who can deliver. He ended the call, sighing quietly, his reflection catching in the glass as he turned. Morning. Madelyn said, her voice steady, but her pulse quick. Morning, he replied, setting his phone down. His eyes lingered on her a moment too long before he looked away. How are the quarterly reports? Almost done, she said. I'll have them printed before your 11 o'clock. Good. He hesitated. You're not avoiding me, are you? She blinked. Would that bother you if I was? He leaned against his desk, folding his arms. Yes. Her heart gave a small traitorous skip. Then I guess I should reassure you, I'm just busy. Busy, he repeated quietly. Right. Before either could say more, the door opened. Harper walked in, her expression unreadable. William, a word. He nodded, gesturing for her to speak. Privately, Madelyn stood, gathering her folders. I'll give you 2 a minute. As she stepped into the hall, Harper closed the glass door behind her. Through the transparent wall, Madelyn could see the faint outlines of their figures. Harper talking, William listening, his expression sharpening. She couldn't hear their words, but the tension in the air spoke volumes. When the door opened again, Harper left first, her face pale and tight. William remained still for a long moment before finally saying, Come in, Madelyn. She did. What was that about rumors? He said shortly. About us. Her stomach tightened. Harper told you. She said people are talking. That your position here might look compromised. Madelyn's voice faltered. Because of what happened that night. He looked up sharply. Nothing happened. She nodded, her throat tight. Exactly. Nothing. But the word hung between them, too heavy to mean nothing at all. He rubbed a hand over his jaw, exhaling. I'll handle it. Handle it how? I'll talk to HR. Make sure they understand this is professional. Professional, she echoed, forcing a smile. Right. He frowned. Madelyn. It's fine, William. She interrupted gently. You don't owe me an explanation. I understand. Do you? Yes. Her voice trembled, just slightly. You have a company to protect. A reputation. He stepped closer. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? She asked softly. His silence was answer enough. She nodded again, gathering the last pieces of her composure. I'll make sure the rumors stop. You don't have to worry about me. Madelyn. But she was already walking away. That evening the office was empty again, lights dimmed to gold. William sat at his desk long after everyone else had gone, staring at a document he wasn't reading. Her words replayed in his head. You don't have to worry about me. But he did, more than he wanted to admit. He rose, glancing toward her empty desk. The small plant she kept beside her computer still sat there, a few leaves brushing the edge of the monitor. He reached out, touching one of them absent-mindedly, then dropped his hand. He had no right. Downstairs in a small cafe across the street, Madelyn sat in a booth by the window, stirring a cup of untouched tea. The rain outside turned everything soft lights, colors her reflection. She told herself she was fine, that she could separate work from whatever this thing between them was. But deep down, she knew it wasn't just about work anymore. Her phone buzzed. William Scott. Are you still at the office? She stared at the message. Then slowly she typed no across the street. A minute later the door opened. He walked in, coat damp from the rain, eyes searching until they found her. Without a word, he slid into the seat across from her. I shouldn't be here, he said quietly. Then why are you? He met her gaze unflinching. Because I couldn't stop thinking about you walking out today. Madelyn set her spoon down. You're making this harder than it has to be. I'm not trying to make it anything he said. I'm trying to understand it. There's nothing to understand, she said softly. We work together. We care about each other maybe more than we should, but it ends there. He didn't respond right away. The rain tapped against the glass, the sound filling the silence. Then he said, You think it's that simple? It has to be. He studied her face. You're protecting me. I'm protecting myself, she said. Something in his expression shifted pain, understanding, maybe both. You deserve better than this, he said. She smiled faintly. Maybe. But this is what it is. They sat like that for a while, two people caught between what they wanted and what they couldn't have. Then quietly she stood. You should go. People will see. Let them, he said. She shook her head. You're not like them, William. You can't afford to be seen bleeding. He flinched at that just slightly. When she walked past him toward the door, he reached out and caught her hand, not to stop her, just to feel her once more. You said you understand, he murmured. But you don't. You can't. Because if you did, you'd know that I've spent my whole life building walls just to keep something like you out. Her breath trembled. Then don't let me in. He let go. Outside, the rain had eased to a drizzle, the air sharp with the scent of wet pavement. She walked back toward her apartment coat, clinging to her shoulders, heart heavier than she wanted to admit. In his office, William stood at the window, watching her silhouette cross the street below, framed in the blur of headlights and rain. For the first time in years, he didn't feel in control. He didn't feel powerful or composed. He felt human, and that terrified him. That night, neither of them slept. Madelyn lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing the echo of his voice in her head. You make it hard to stay numb. And across the city, William sat in the dark. The skyline stretched before him, her name a quiet ache in his chest. He knew he should let her go, let the distance rebuild itself. But every instinct he had, the ones that made him successful, the ones that made him feared, had begun to fail him. And beneath all his logic, his discipline, his perfectly constructed life, he finally began to realize the truth. He wasn't afraid of losing control. He was afraid of what might happen if he stopped fighting it. The new year came quietly. Chicago thawed in fragments, snow retreating to gutters, glass towers dripping with light. Inside Scott and Raymond, the hum of ambition returned steady and relentless. But for William Scott and Madelyn Robinson, something had already broken loose beneath the surface, something that couldn't return to the way it was. They hadn't spoken outside of work for nearly 2 weeks. Every interaction had become rehearsed, formal greetings, precise instructions, clipped thank yous. Yet beneath that careful rhythm lived an ache neither could silence. Madelyn moved through the days with a calm face and trembling pulse. She poured herself into work, into precision, into anything that would keep her from thinking about him. But every glance, every brush of his voice, every time his eyes found hers across the room, it all undid her again. William was no better. He told himself he'd done the right thing, pulled back, restored boundaries. And yet every night when he stood before the vast window of his penthouse, he found himself searching the skyline for something he couldn't name. He'd built his life on structure, on rules. But she had come in like a storm, and now the silence she left behind was unbearable. Then came the news. Harper appeared in his doorway one morning, a faint tremor in her voice. Madelyn handed in her notice. William froze. What? She's resigning. 2 weeks' notice. He stared at her words, caught somewhere between disbelief and panic. Did she say why Harper hesitated? Just that it's time. He said nothing, just nodded once, cold and polite, before dismissing her. But the moment the door closed, he stood there in silence, the air in his office suddenly too thin. Downstairs, Madelyn packed her desk slowly, methodically. She told herself it was the right decision. She needed distance. She needed to breathe again. But when she reached the small plant he'd once touched absently, the one that had somehow survived fluorescent light and overwatered mornings, her eyes blurred. She didn't hear him at first. You're really leaving? William stood in the doorway, his voice lower than usual, almost uncertain. She swallowed. I think it's time. Time for what? For something else. He stepped closer. You're running. She laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. Maybe. But staying isn't an option anymore. He studied her face. You hate quitting. I do. Her voice trembled. But sometimes you have to walk away before something breaks. His jaw tightened. And what exactly is breaking? She met his eyes. Me. The word hung between them, raw and unguarded. He took another step closer, his voice barely above a whisper. Don't do this. I have to. You don't, he said softer now, almost pleading. You think leaving will fix this, but it won't. It'll stop me from wanting what I can't have, she said. His breath caught. And what is it you think you can't have? She looked at him, really looked, and for a second the facade fell away. You. The silence that followed felt like a wound opening. He took another step close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, smell the faint trace of cedar and coffee on his skin. Madelyn, he said quietly, I've spent my entire life choosing control over connection. Because control doesn't hurt. It doesn't leave. Her voice was barely a whisper. And now, he exhaled, the sound fragile. Now I don't know how to control this. Her heart trembled. Then don't. He reached for her hand, slow, deliberate, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. When his fingers closed around hers, the world seemed to still, the city, the office, the ache. You're not like anyone I've ever met. he said, his voice breaking the quiet. You challenge me, infuriate me, undo me, and somehow you make me want to start over. Madelyn's eyes glistened. You don't get to start over with me, William. You only get to be honest. He stepped closer. Then here's the truth, I can't lose you. She tried to smile through the tears that burned her eyes. You already have. He shook his head. Not yet. She looked away, swallowing the ache in her throat. You think you can fix everything with words, but some things aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be survived. His hand brushed her cheek. Then let me survive it with you. The breath caught in her chest. For a moment she let herself lean into his touch, let herself feel the warmth she'd been denying. His thumb traced a slow line beneath her jaw, and when his lips found hers, the world fell away. It wasn't a kiss of impulse, it was one of surrender. Quiet, aching, inevitable. The kind of kiss that tasted like everything they'd been holding back, and everything they'd never say again. When she finally pulled away, her breath trembled. You shouldn't have done that. I know, he said, voice rough, but I couldn't stop. Tears spilled, then silent and uninvited. She turned away, pressing a hand to her chest. You'll be fine. You'll go back to your perfect world, your perfect control. And I'll find mine. He shook his head. There's no world worth living in if you're not in it. She closed her eyes, her voice breaking. Don't make this harder. He was quiet for a long time, then said softly, You once told me I was afraid of breathing. Maybe you were right. But the truth is, I only started breathing the day you walked into my office. Her shoulders trembled. He reached for her again, but she stepped back. Goodbye, William. Her voice was barely more than a whisper, and before he could find words to stop her, she was gone. The next days passed in fragments. Her desk emptied. Her laughter vanished from the halls. Her scent, faint and familiar, lingered in his office long after she left. William threw himself into work, into meetings, into everything that used to give him purpose, but none of it worked. The city kept spinning. The company kept thriving, but without her, everything felt hollow. One evening, as he stood by the window, the sun dipped below the skyline, washing the city in gold. He remembered the night she stayed late, the sound of her humming, the warmth of her hand against his fevered skin. He remembered the way she'd said his name, not like a title, but like a truth. He closed his eyes and whispered it into the quiet. Madelyn. Across town, in a small apartment filled with boxes and half-packed dreams, Madelyn sat by the window, watching the river shimmer below. She'd started a new job offer process in another city somewhere far enough to forget. But even as she typed the resignation email, her hands hesitated. The rain began again, soft and familiar. She thought of him then, his silence, his eyes, his impossible tenderness, and wondered if he was standing by his window, too lost in the same ache. A knock at the door pulled her from the thought. She opened it and froze. William stood there, coat damp from the rain, eyes tired, but certain. I told myself to let you go, he said quietly, but I can't. She stared, unable to breathe. William, I don't care about rumors, about boundaries, about what people think I should be. His voice shook just barely. All I care about is this. If I walk away now, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what it would have been like if I hadn't. Her eyes filled again, her voice trembling. You don't belong in my world. Then I'll build one that does, he said simply. She stood there for a moment, her heart torn between reason and the ache that had been waiting for this. And then finally she stepped forward, closing the distance that had haunted them for so long. When his hands found her waist, when her fingers brushed the collar of his coat, the city outside blurred into nothing. There was no office, no title, no line left to cross. Just two people who had spent too long pretending they weren't already in love. And as the rain kept falling against the glass, William Scott Mann, of control of silence of walls, finally let go. He held her as though the world could end in that moment, and it would have been enough.